Body is a 2026 mystery horror novel by Bethany C. Morrow. Yeah, so this was another Goodreads Had a Reading challenge, and I wanted that dang bookmark, so why not reads? I happened to snag this puppy just as it came into my local library, so I got lucky. I know Bethany C. Morrow's name mostly because I've seen some of her young adult novels before, but I've never actually read anything by her before, so I was interested to see how she fared writing adult literature. Okay, so the story starts with our protagonist, Mavis, getting into a car crash after she's hit by another driver who happens to be a family friend from her church. Her parents' church, technically. We're quickly acquainted with the idea that Mavis's parents are fairly toxic individuals, particularly her mother, and that she's developed a great deal of shame and anxiety from the way they and their religious community brought her up. I should clarify here that we're not really led to believe that this is a cult, specifically. It's more like a very cliquish, high and mighty religious community that feels the need to shame and police its members' conduct constantly. Not the healthiest religious group you've ever seen, but also not really meeting the qualifications for a cult. So Mavis's husband, Jared, brings her home after a stint in the hospital. That night, Mavis sees another old church member, Havila, digging a hole in their backyard, but when confronted, Havila goes from being, well, I do have a history of sleepwalking, to, you're spiritually attacking me, Mavis, I'll pray for you, and hangs up. Then the next day, someone attacks Mavis and Gerard in the hardware store, brutally attacking and, if I recall correctly, killing an employee. Later, a few people break into Mavis and Gerard's house at night, badly injuring Gerard and forcing Mavis to kill one of them. In the hospital, she receives a mysterious video of her ex-husband being buried up to his neck and stoned to death. And then, when she goes to visit her parents, one of their neighbors javelin throws a mailbox through the back window of Mavis's car as she tries to kill her. So what do all of these attacks have in common? They are all perpetrated by members of Mavis's old church, and they were all present at Mavis and Gerard's wedding. They also took the congregation vow, which effectively is the community asserting that they will keep the couple on the right path and hold them accountable for their sins. That last part's kind of important, because a little while back, Mavis got the idea that Gerard might be cheating on her with his work wife. So she goes ahead and sleeps with her ex-husband, the one that got stoned to death. So evidently, the congregation vow has supernaturally bound the congregation to punish him and Mavis for their transgression. For what it's worth, the attackers aren't deliberately trying to kill her. They're in a sort of trance, becoming violent and then completely forgetting everything that happened after they snap out of it. That's about as much direct recap as I'll do for the story. I'll probably end up disclosing a few more details as I do my analysis, but everything I've said thus far is the meat of the book's plot. Okay, so the first thing that stood out to me was the writing. It's very... Geez, how do I describe this? It's a bit fever dreamy. The writing is very in the moment and sparse, very lacking in a lot of the peripheral details authors tend to slip into their writing. The immediate focus is on Mavis's inner world, and while the book is not absent of those peripheral details or environmental setting, those things are noticeably more absent from this book than they generally are from other books. I don't know how to feel about the writing. Having never read any of this author's other works, I can't say for sure whether or not this was a deliberate creative choice, or if this is just how she writes. The beginning of the book feels very weird, and I think that might be because we start off the story with Mavis being very anxious and consumed with worry that she's going to lose Gerard. Initially, we have no context for this, since her sleeping with her ex doesn't come up until much later on. But realistically, while we do learn more details as the story progresses, I can't say that necessarily comes with a change in the writing. The writing is vague, dreamy, characters are just there, we don't get solid descriptions of what they look like or the little nuances of their behavior. Mavis and Gerard's house is there, we get some description of it, but we don't really get a solid sense of how Mavis feels about the place or her personal touches to her living space. Then again, do we necessarily need to know that for the story to progress? Things happen, we stay pretty firmly in Mavis's head for these situations where she's observing and maybe offering a little commentary, but there's a sense of removal from the events as they're happening. You feel like you're watching it from a distance or, again, in a dream. We get a few glimpses into Mavis's church and the culture of the congregation, but they're very fleeting glimpses and don't really paint a super full picture of what she's coming from. At the same time, we are given some subtle characterizations of this group by way of the dialogue and a few flashbacks, so I can't rule out the possibility that the author was trying to leave some things mysterious. It's difficult for me to put into words, and even if I read a paragraph or two from the book directly to you, I don't think it's going to clarify what I mean by that. It's very much a your mileage may vary situation. You might love the writing or you might hate it. As of my scripting of this review, which is fairly shortly after the book's release in February of 2026. I don't know yet when this review will go live on my channel. The Goodreads rating sits at 3.09 with 532 people contributing to the average. And I think the polarized ratings likely reflect the attitudes a lot of people have about the writing style. As as for something about this book I really did like, one of the things that was very interesting about this book was the language the church members used to contextualize their experiences. It's a very specific way of speaking, kind of relating all struggle and conflict back to spiritual warfare and whatnot. I'm not religious, but I have seen people use this manner of speech before in both writing and in real life. Let me pull up one of the best examples I think the book gives us of this so I can show you what I mean. On page 65, when Mavis is confronting Havila about digging in her yard over the phone, Havila denies having been in Mavis's yard and then says, quote, "I faced a lot of attacks on my ministry and calling. And believe me, I know we can all be unwitting vessels for distraction and discouragement, so I don't keep ledgers, but this has to be rebuked. I'm sorry you were scared, Mavis, and I'll hold you up in prayer, but I know what I've been freed from, and I won't let a sudden accusation hurl me off track into a season of doubt." Unquote. You see what I mean here, right? Mavis is calling Havila up and saying, "Hey, you were in my yard last night, digging a hole. Why were you doing that? What's going on here?" On page 64, Havila references having a history of sleepwalking, but as the conversation progresses after that, she becomes more and more certain that Mavis has to be wrong. And when Mavis insists, "No, actually, it was definitely you, I literally saw you," Havila retreats into spiritual language. I don't know what branch of Christianity this group falls under, it's never really explained, but ministry in the context Havila is using it, particularly since she's coupling it with her calling, effectively refers to the actions she partakes in as an expression of her faith. This could mean counseling others religiously, it could mean undertaking acts of charity, and it could also mean the personal choices one makes in their day-to-day lives to live out their faith. The next bit, "I know we can all be vessels for distraction and discouragement, so she doesn't keep ledgers, but this needs to be rebuked." The idea being conveyed here is that Mavis is being a vessel for distraction and discouragement by accusing Havila of doing something weird on her property. The trickier part of this language is that Mavis is a vessel. That being, she is not distracting or discouraging, but she is being a vessel for these negative spiritual traits. Furthermore, the implication is that Mavis's accusation threatens to discourage or distract Havila, likely in a religious sense. Quick sidebar? Very quick sidebar. This book very, very rarely has actually, come to think of it, no, I don't think it ever makes any direct reference to God or the devil or Jesus, at least that I can recall. I'm not going to, die on the hill of there was definitely no references to God, Jesus, or the devil, but I do not recall seeing one in this book. This spiritual religious language is used throughout the book, but I can't actually recall anyone referencing the big ones in the religion, God or Jesus, explicitly in the story. And I do wonder if that might have been a very deliberate choice on the author's part. There's actually a quote from the Bible at the beginning of the book. Matthew 15:8-9. I hope I'm saying that right. I rarely quote the Bible, so I'm not super well versed on how to say the passages correctly. Quote, "These people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men." Unquote. I feel like what the author is getting at is this type of religious devotion has less to do with God than it does a need to impose social controls on the people around you, where religion becomes a vehicle to force others to behave in a way you find acceptable. That was my initial theory, and remembering that Bible quote makes me a little more certain that's the message the author is going for. By not making references specifically to God or Jesus or the devil, you're actually kind of taking the idea that they're not centering God, they're not centering Jesus, they're centering their own selfish human needs as opposed to focusing on the creator and all that. Actually quite subtle and clever. I like it. Anyway, Havila then goes on to say that she doesn't keep ledgers, that being she doesn't keep track of slights, but this has to be rebuked. Rebuke means that you're very sharply or aggressively criticizing someone, but specifically within a religious context, it comes with that undercurrent of religious authority, spiritual authority, I guess you could say. It's not just, I'm criticizing you. It's, I'm criticizing you from a place of spiritual elevation. In religious settings, you'll often hear rebuke used in the context of rebuking the enemy or rebuking the devil. And the idea is that your strong words and attitude of faith are being used to push back or banish the dark forces that might be attacking you or someone else. So Havila saying that she needs to rebuke Mavis's assertion comes with a subtle implication that Mavis is coming from a place of mistruth, again, ostensibly because she's a vessel for distraction and discouragement, and that Havila is coming from a higher ground of religious truth, which gives her the grounds to rebuke Mavis and her lies. Which aren't actually lies, mind you, because Havila hasn't actually come right out and accused Mavis of lying, which implies intent and a little bit of malice, but rather that Mavis is a vessel of distraction and discouragement that is attacking Havila's ministry and calling. The level of manipulation within this language is actually fascinating. In any case, Havila is sorry that Mavis was frightened, and she'll hold her up in prayer, support her through prayer, I assume, but she knows what she's been freed from, and she won't let a sudden accusation hurl her off track into a season of doubt. The overall point is, my life was bad, but now it's good. I'm not going to let your concerns about my mental health or sleepwalking lead me into a bad place again. I assume doubt here would mean self-doubt. There's a little bit of extra context here in that Mavis met Havila after her divorce. They were part of an unmarried women's group together, which Havila was sort of the shining light in, but now she's married and has kids. This sort of language is present all throughout the book, from a variety of characters associated with Mavis's old church. There is a constant contextualization of behavior through this spiritual doublespeak. You're not asking why I was digging in your yard last night. You're spiritually assaulting me with information I can't make sense of. So now I must turn this in my favor by suggesting that you're a vessel for negative energy and I'm going to pray for you. But I must also stand upon my pedestal and rebuke you for saying something I don't want to hear. I actually wonder if the author might have some history with Christians who speak this way, because it feels like she's using a language that she understands fluently. It's one of the reasons I hesitate to say that the author didn't give us enough information or paint a full enough picture of the congregation, because in a way, she told us a lot about them by showing us how they speak and how they reframe situations using spiritual language. You can intuit a lot about their group and Mavis's character by seeing how they communicate with one another. So yeah, very impressed with that aspect of the book. Very masterful portrayal of the language and psychology of this particular flavor of Christianity. What else? Mavis was interesting, but again, there was that little sense of dreamlike distance between her and the audience. She starts off very anxious and then gets progressively more aggressive and unhinged as the book goes on. Not going to give away the ending, but she had quite a transformation by the end, and so has the congregation. I'd argue it was somewhat satisfying, given how badly her parents and the congregation have fucked her up, but she definitely goes from being a fairly sympathetic character to a morally gray one, maybe even a villain herself in some ways, by the time the story's done. Gerard was interesting too, in the sense that we don't have a great sense of him and his character either, but that kind of seems like it might be the point. Mavis has a certain view of him and she wants him to be a certain way, and up until the events of the book, she's been a bit blind to certain aspects of his character and personality. And it's reciprocal, because he doesn't quite understand who she is either and only sees the parts he wants to see. It's a messy situation, and it was interesting to watch how it developed over the course of the story. The horror... I feel like the horror was there, but also that sort of dreamy distance had a way of damaging it. Mavis is reacting in the moment, but I didn't really get a solid sense of her fear, of her dread, of her sense that she and Gerard aren't truly safe. Two of the best horror-related scenes were the ones in the hardware store, and the one where Mavis and Gerard are being attacked in their home. But even then, there's a certain emotional distance Mavis has from the scenes in front of her, and though the scenes are objectively horrifying, they don't really feel horrifying. To me, anyway. Obviously, different strokes for different folks. Different people are going to get hit different ways. So yeah, that was The Body. I am genuinely torn on how to feel about this book. On one hand, I think it did a masterful job of depicting a specific religious culture in a subtle and revealing way, but I also think the way the book was written puts a certain amount of distance between the audience and the characters, and more importantly, the audience and the horror. Some people may enjoy that writing style, some people may not, so I really do think it's a you'll have to read it and decide for yourself situation. If I'm thinking of who would like this book, I mean, the distance from the horror might appeal to people who are getting into the genre and maybe don't want to get hit with a full-on Jason Voorhees slasher fest. And the dreamy nature of the book might appeal to people who liked Mona Awad, since her stuff tends to be the darker, dreamier type. I feel like those are the people who would like the book.